They expected medical aid, received human warships instead. Part 2. The Wolves at the Gate. The plague did not slow down. It moved through the deep currents and rose into the shallower cities and found new victims with cold efficiency. On the 9th day since the distress beacon was sent, the death count crossed 12%. Entire neighborhoods in the outer settlements had been abandoned. The water recycling systems in 3 major cities had failed because there were not enough healthy workers to maintain them. The hospitals had stopped admitting new patients because there was nowhere to put them. High Speaker Orinus had not slept in 4 days. He stood in the council chamber with dark circles beneath his wide eyes, and his skin had taken on a grayish tone that was not healthy for a Velhari. Saloon stood beside him, working from a portable data terminal, coordinating what was left of the medical response. She had lost 11 colleagues in the past week. She did not talk about it. There was no time. The council debated rationing. They debated quarantine zones. They debated whether to shut down the transit tunnels between cities entirely and let each settlement fend for itself. There were no good options. Every plan they discussed meant choosing who would live and who would be left to die. Then the first ships arrived in orbit. Fossick and his Merchants Guild convoy dropped out of faster-than-light travel, with 4 cargo haulers loaded with generic antibiotics, water purification tablets, and basic medical scanning equipment. It was not much. Fossick knew it was not much. He was a trader, not a relief organization. But he had heard the beacon, and he had loaded what he could, and he had come. He transported down to the surface and met with Orenus in the council chamber. He was a reptilian species, short and thick-bodied, with scaled green skin and small, sharp eyes. He spoke bluntly, because that was his nature. He told Orinus that the medicines would help, but they would not be enough. He told him that the antibiotics were broad-spectrum and might slow the plague, but would not stop it. And then he told him something else. The Draveen were coming. Fossick had contacts throughout the shipping lanes. He had heard the chatter. A Draveen fleet of 40 warships was on a direct course for the Talon system, and they were not carrying medicine. Orinus asked what they were carrying, and Fossick looked at him with something close to pity, and said they were carrying soldiers. Orinus felt the ground shift beneath him. He asked Fossick what they could do. Fossick shook his head and said he did not know. His ships were unarmed cargo haulers. He could not fight a Draveen war fleet. No one in this part of space could. Saloon asked if anyone else had responded to the beacon. Fossick said he had heard that a human patrol ship was operating nearby, but that humans were a small species, relatively new to the galactic stage, and 1 patrol ship would not matter against 40 Draveen warships. Saloon filed the information away and said nothing more. 2 days later, the Draveen arrived. The fleet came out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Talon system, in a formation that was designed to intimidate. 40 warships spread across a wide arc, their hulls dark and angular, and covered with weapon mounts. Fleet Commander Jal Karik sat in his command throne aboard the flagship, and watched the tiny blue world grow larger on his display. He broadcast a message to the surface. His voice was smooth and carefully rehearsed. He expressed sympathy for the suffering of the Velhari people. He offered the full resources of the Draveen Dominion to aid in their recovery. Medical teams, supply shipments, engineering support. All he asked in return was a simple agreement. A permanent Draveen military installation on the planet. Exclusive rights to the mineral deposits on the ocean floor. Draveen authority over all orbital traffic in the system. And a formal treaty recognizing the Velhari as a protected client state of the Dominion. The terms were not negotiable. Orenus listened to the message in the council chamber with his advisors around him. No one spoke for a long time. They all understood what the terms meant. Client state was a polite word for conquered. Protected was a polite word for owned. The Draveen were offering to save the Velhari by taking everything they had. But the plague was killing them, and 40 warships were in their sky, and they had nothing. Not one ship, not one weapon, not one shield generator. Orenis looked at Saloon, and she looked back at him, and he could see in her eyes that she knew there was no way out. He began to prepare a response, accepting the terms. And then something happened that no one expected. A transponder signal lit up near the fourth moon. A single ship, small by the standards of the warships around it, but broadcasting on a clear channel with a human identification code. The USS Callaway announced its presence to the system. Karek barely noticed it. His sensor officer reported it as a single human frigate, lightly armed, no threat. Karek dismissed it with a wave of his claw and returned his attention to the planet. But the Callaway was not alone. 12 contacts appeared on every sensor grid in the system simultaneously. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a staggered formation, one after another, each one larger than the last. Destroyers first, then frigates, then escort cruisers, and at the center, dropping into real space with a burst of energy that lit up the sensors like a small star, the heavy cruiser USS Ridgeline. The 9th Expeditionary Battle Group arranged itself in a combat spread between the Draveen fleet and the planet. It was a formation that every spacefaring species in the galaxy recognized. It was not defensive. It was not exploratory. It was a wall, a line drawn in the empty space that said very clearly that whatever was behind it was not to be touched. Captain Nathan Ellis sat in his command chair aboard the Ridgeline. He was a lean man with dark skin and close-cropped hair, and brown eyes that were calm in the way that deep water is calm. He had been in the fleet for 25 years, and he had fought in 3 engagements, and he had never lost a ship under his command. He opened a channel to the Draveen fleet. His message was brief. He identified himself and his battle group. He stated that they were responding to the Velhari medical distress beacon under the humanitarian provisions of Interstellar Convention. He advised all armed vessels in the system to hold position and state their intentions clearly. His tone was polite, measured, and completely without fear. Karek stared at his display. This was not supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be a minor species. They were supposed to be too far away, and too weak, and too uninterested to respond to a signal from an unimportant ocean world. He ordered his communications officer to respond. The message told the humans that the situation was under Draveen jurisdiction, and that they should withdraw immediately. Ellis did not reply with words. He gave a quiet order to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer, a stocky man with blonde hair and a face that showed no expression when he was working. Palmer ran a full active sensor sweep of every Draveen ship in the system. He cataloged every weapon mount, every shield generator, every missile tube, and every power signature. Then he broadcast the results on an open channel so that every ship in the system could see it. It was not an attack. It was a statement. It said that the humans could see everything the Draveen had, and they were not leaving. On the surface, Orenis watched the new sensor data fill his display. He did not understand military formations. He did not know what the different ship classes meant, or how to read weapon signatures. But he could see that the human ships had placed themselves between the Draveen fleet and his world. He could see that they were not moving. He turned to Saluin and asked who these people were. He said they had sent a call for medicine, and asked why there were warships in their sky. Saluin looked at the human identification codes on the display. She had spent years studying the transmissions of other species. She knew a little about their history, their wars, their strange and contradictory nature, their capacity for both terrible violence and extraordinary kindness. She told Orenis simply that they were humans, and when he asked what that meant, she said she was not entirely sure, but that they should not have come, and they were here anyway, and that might mean something. In the cold silence of orbit, Two fleets faced each other across the curve of a dying world, and neither one blinked. They expected medical aid, received human warships instead. Part 3. The Line in the Void. The standoff settled into a tense and uncomfortable silence. The Dravine fleet held position on one side of Talon 4. The human battle group held position on the other. Between them, the planet turned slowly in the pale light of its twin suns, and on its surface, people continued to die. Aboard the ridgeline, Captain Nathan Ellis stood at the observation window of the tactical operations room and looked out at the distant shapes of the Dravine warships. They were visible only as small dark points against the stars, but the sensors painted them in sharp detail on the displays behind him. 40 ships, 40 sets of weapons, 40 captains waiting for orders from a commander, who was probably as uncertain as Ellis was about what would happen next. Commander Lisa Pruitt, his executive officer, entered the room with a datapad in her hand. She was a tall woman with sharp features and auburn hair pulled back from her face, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made junior officers straighten up when she walked past. She laid out the tactical assessment. The Dravine outnumbered them roughly 3-1. That sounded bad, but the numbers were misleading. Human ships were built differently from Dravine ships. They were faster, more heavily armored for their size, and equipped with targeting systems that could track and engage multiple contacts simultaneously. The Dravine built their ships for mass and intimidation. They were big and heavily armed, but their defensive systems were a generation behind, and their formations relied on overwhelming numbers rather than tactical precision. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer joined them and added his own analysis. He pointed to the Dravine formation on the display and noted that it was spread too wide. The ships were positioned to look impressive, to fill the sensor screens of anyone watching, but they were too far apart to support each other effectively in an actual fight. If it came to combat, the human ships could engage individual Dravine vessels before their neighbors could respond. Ellis asked the question directly. If it came to a fight, could they win? Palmer paused. He was not a man who gave easy answers. He said yes, they could win, but the cost would be significant. He estimated they would lose 3 ships, possibly 4. That meant somewhere between 300 and 500 human lives. Ellis absorbed that number in silence. Then he said that was unacceptable, and that they would make sure it did not come to a fight. He did not say how. He simply said it as a fact, and moved on. While the ridgeline prepared for the worst, the Callaway handled a different kind of work. Captain Daniel Greer opened a direct communication channel to the surface of Talon 4, and made contact with High Speaker Orenis. The conversation was awkward at first. Orenis was speaking through a translator system, and the Velhari language did not map neatly onto human speech patterns. There were long pauses and misunderstandings, and moments where Greer had to repeat himself 3 or 4 times. But he was patient. He had always been patient. It was the thing he was best at. Orenis told Greer that his people had asked for medical help. He said it plainly and without accusation, but the confusion in his voice was obvious. He did not understand why warships had come instead of hospital ships. He did not understand what the humans wanted. Greer chose his words carefully. He told Orenis that the medical convoy was on its way and that it would arrive within a few days. He explained that when the distress signal was received, human intelligence had detected the Dravine fleet moving toward Talon 4, and that the warships had been sent to make sure the medical teams could do their work safely. He said it the way he might explain a simple fact, without drama or pride, as though sending a battle group to protect a species they had never met was the most natural thing in the world. Orenis asked the question that had been eating at him since the human ships arrived. He asked what the humans wanted in return. Greer was quiet for a moment. He understood why Orenis was asking. In the Velhari experience, nothing came without a price. The Dravine had offered help with strings attached, that amounted to chains. Every species the Velhari had ever encountered operated on a system of exchange and obligation. The idea that someone might help them simply because they needed help and someone was able to provide it was foreign to them. Greer told him the truth. He said that for now, the humans wanted nothing. He said the Velhari had asked for help, and humans heard them, and this was what human help looked like. He knew it sounded strange. He knew Orenis probably did not believe him, but it was the truth, and Greer was not a man who was comfortable with lies. On the other side of the planet, Zol-Kharak was dealing with his own frustrations. He sat in his command chamber aboard the Dravine flagship, surrounded by his senior officers, and the mood was dark. The humans had not responded to his demand that they withdraw. They had not responded to anything. They were simply there, sitting in their formation, watching and waiting, and the silence was more unsettling than any threat. His intelligence officer, Sub-Commander Dren, presented what the Dravine knew about human military capability. It was not much. The humans were a relatively young species. They had been in space for only a few centuries. Their empire, if it could even be called that, was small compared to the Dominion. But scattered reports from the few conflicts where humans had been involved suggested something troubling. Their ships were fast, their weapons were accurate, and they had a tendency to fight far beyond what their numbers should have allowed. Carrick dismissed the assessment with a sharp click of his mandibles. He called the humans bluffers. He said they were playing a game they could not win. 12 ships against 40 was not courage, it was stupidity. He ordered 3 of his warships to advance slowly toward the human line. Just a test, a push to see how the humans would react. The 3 Dravine ships moved forward at quarter speed, their weapons powered but not locked on any target. It was a standard intimidation maneuver, the kind the Dravine had used 100 times against weaker species. Move closer, look bigger, wait for the other side to flinch. The humans did not flinch. Ellis saw the movement the instant it began. He gave a single calm order. 2 destroyers, the USS Harlan and the USS Beckett, broke from the formation and moved to intercept. They did not rush. They did not charge. They simply adjusted their course and closed the distance until they were within visual range of the advancing Dravine ships. At that distance, the Dravine captains could see the human destroyers through their observation ports. They could see the clean, angular lines of the hulls. They could see the weapon mounts, each one tracking their ships with mechanical precision. They could see the running lights and the identification markings and the absolute steady calm of ships that were not afraid. The Dravine captains reported back to Carrick. The humans were not backing down. They were in fact closer now than they had been before. Carrick cursed in the harsh clicking language of his species and ordered his ships to hold position. The standoff continued. But while the warships stared at each other across the void, something quieter was happening on a different frequency. Dr. Kevin Marsh, the chief medical officer of the Callaway, had been reviewing the biological data from the Velhari medical database that Saloon had transmitted at Greer's request. Marsh was 38 years old, with brown hair that was always slightly too long, and a habit of talking to himself while he worked. He was a doctor, and the plague on Talon 4 was a problem he could actually help solve. He put together a compressed data package containing human medical research on similar viral pathogens, recommended treatment protocols adapted for amphibian biology, and a set of diagnostic procedures that the Velhari medical teams could begin using immediately. He included a personal message offering to consult remotely with whoever was leading the medical response on the surface. Saluin received the package in the middle of the night cycle. She had not slept in over 30 hours. She opened it, expecting nothing useful, because the medicines Fossick had brought had barely made a difference, and she had stopped hoping for miracles. She read the treatment protocols 3 times. Then she read them again. They were not perfect. They were designed for human biology, and would need significant adaptation. But the underlying science was sound. and several of the antiviral approaches suggested by Marsh were based on principles that the Valhari had never considered. She could see paths forward that she had not seen before. She sent a reply to Marsh within minutes, accepting his offer to consult, and attaching a complete dataset of the plague pathogen's genetic structure. Then she sat alone in her laboratory in the underwater city, and thought about the fact that the same species that had brought warships to her sky had also just sent her the first real hope she had felt in weeks. She did not understand humans. She was not sure anyone did, but for the first time since the plague began, she thought that maybe her people were going to survive. They expected medical aid, received human warships instead. Part 4. The Breaking Point. The standoff entered its third day, and the tension had become a physical thing. It sat in the air of every bridge and every command room, on every ship in the system. Officers spoke in low voices. Meals were eaten quickly and without conversation. Sleep came in short, restless shifts. Everyone on both sides could feel that the situation was moving toward something, and no one knew exactly when it would arrive. Aboard the Dravine flagship, Joel Carrick received a communication from the Dominion High Council. The message was brief, and its meaning was clear. The Council expected results. Talon 4 was supposed to have been secured by now. The mineral resources on the ocean floor were needed for the next phase of fleet expansion, and the Council had already allocated them in their planning documents. Carrick was told to either complete the mission or withdraw, and withdrawal was described in the message as a humiliation that would not be forgotten. Carrick read the message alone in his chamber. He was a proud officer, and the word humiliation burned in him like acid. He had commanded fleets for 30 years. He had conquered 6 worlds, and forced the surrender of a dozen more. He was not going to be turned away from an undefended ocean planet by 12 human ships. He called his senior officers together and laid out a new plan. He would not attack the human fleet directly. That would be an act of war against a species whose full military capability was unknown, and even Carrick was not reckless enough to start an interstellar war without authorization. Instead, he would go around them. He ordered a squadron of 6 fast attack ships to make a high-speed run past the human formation. They would swing wide, using the planet's gravity to accelerate, and drop into low orbit over the Valhari capital. Once there, they would deploy ground forces directly to the surface. Soldiers on the ground, mixed in with a civilian population. Once the Dravine had boots on the planet, the humans would be unable to fire on them without risking massive Valhari casualties. It was cynical, and it was cruel, and Carrick did not care. He needed results. The 6 attack ships detached from the main fleet and began their burn. They accelerated hard, pushing their engines to maximum, and swung out in a wide arc that curved around the edge of the human formation. It was fast, and it was aggressive, and it was meant to happen before the humans could react. But the humans reacted immediately. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer was watching his sensor display when the Dravine ships broke formation. He tracked their trajectory for less than 2 seconds before he understood what they were doing. He reported to Ellis in a voice that was sharp and clear. 6 Dravine fast attack ships were on a course that would take them past the human line and into low orbit over the capital. Estimated time to insertion was 11 minutes. Ellis did not hesitate. He had been waiting for this. He had known that Carrick would not sit still forever, and he had spent the last 2 days gaming out every possible move the Dravine might make. This was one of them. He ordered the Harlan and the Beckett to intercept. The 2 destroyers broke from formation and moved with a speed that surprised every Dravine sensor operator watching. Human ships were fast, but the Dravine had not truly appreciated how fast until they saw the 2 destroyers cross the gap in minutes, cutting across the flight path of the Dravine squadron at an angle that forced the lead ships to make an immediate decision. They could alter course, or they could collide with a human warship. There was no third option. Lieutenant Commander Amy Chen commanded the Harlan. She was 36 years old, with black hair cut short, and a reputation among her crew for being the calmest person on the ship in a crisis. She opened a direct channel to the Dravine squadron leader and delivered a warning that was exactly 1 sentence long. She told him to alter course immediately or be fired upon, and she told him there would be no second warning. The squadron leader hesitated. He was a career officer who had followed orders his entire life. But the human destroyer was close enough that he could see it on his forward viewport, and every weapon it carried was pointed at him. He made a decision. He broke formation and pulled his ship up and away from the planet. 4 of the 5 remaining ships followed him. The 6th did not. The 6th ship was commanded by a young Dravine officer who had more ambition than experience and more anger than sense. He had heard Karek speak about the humans with contempt. He believed that the humans were bluffing. He believed that no species would actually fire on a Dravine warship over an unimportant alien world. He pushed his engines harder and continued his run toward the planet. On the bridge of the ridgeline, Palmer reported that one Dravine ship was still on approach. Ellis looked at the display. The ship was 8 minutes from low-orbit insertion. If it reached the capital, the entire tactical situation would change. Ground forces mixed with civilians meant the humans would lose their clean advantage. Every minute of delay benefited Karek. Ellis gave the order to fire. The ridgeline's forward energy lance activated. It was a weapon designed for precision work at long range. A focused beam of concentrated energy that could cut through hull plating like a blade through paper. Palmer aimed it personally. He did not aim at the Dravine ship's engines, or its weapons, or its bridge. He aimed at the space just in front of the ship's bow, close enough to leave a scar on the hull plating, but far enough to avoid any critical damage. The beam crossed the distance in an instant. It passed so close to the Dravine ship that the young officer felt his vessel shudder from the energy discharge. A line of scorched metal appeared along the forward hull where the beam had grazed it. Alarms screamed in his cockpit. His sensor displays flickered, and his shields, which had been at half power, collapsed entirely from the electromagnetic interference. He was alive. His ship was intact. But the message was impossibly clear. The humans had fired at him, and they had chosen exactly how much damage to inflict. They could have destroyed him. They had decided not to, this time. The young officer reversed course and ran back to the Dravine fleet at maximum speed. The system went completely silent. For nearly 3 full minutes, not a single transmission was sent from any ship in the Talon system. Every captain, every officer, every sensor operator on every vessel processed what had just happened. The humans had fired first. They had drawn a line, and when someone crossed it, they had pulled the trigger without hesitation and without bluffing. But they had fired a warning shot so precise, so perfectly controlled, that it demonstrated something more frightening than raw firepower. It demonstrated choice. The humans could choose exactly how much destruction they wanted to deliver. They could kill, or they could warn, and the decision was entirely theirs. Aboard the Dravine flagship, Carrick stared at the tactical replay on his display. He watched the ridgeline's energy lance cross the screen. He watched the perfect accuracy of the shot. He watched his attack ship retreat with a burned hull and a terrified crew. Sub-Commander Dren stood beside him and spoke quietly. He said that if the humans could place a shot that accurately at that range, then the Dravine fleet's numerical advantage was meaningless. Numbers mattered when both sides were roughly equal in technology. They did not matter when one side could pick you apart at a distance you could not even return fire from. Carrick did not respond. He sat in his command throne and stared at the display, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something he was not accustomed to. He felt doubt. On the Callaway, Hannah Cole intercepted a burst transmission from the Dravine flagship. It was encrypted, but human codebreakers had cracked the Dravine military cipher months ago. She decrypted it and read it, and then she brought it to Greer. Carrick was requesting permission from the Dominion High Council to withdraw. He was framing it as a strategic redeployment. He cited sensor data suggesting the human battle group was the advance element of a larger fleet, which was not true, but which gave the High Council a way to approve the withdrawal without admitting defeat. The language was careful and political, but the meaning underneath was simple. The Dravine were leaving. Greer read the message and allowed himself a small breath of relief. He forwarded it to Ellis with a single note attached. He wrote that it looked like the doctors would have a clear path after all. On the surface of Talon 4, Saloon was working in the medical hall when the news reached her. She stopped what she was doing and stood very still for a moment. Then, she went back to work, because there were still patients who needed her. And the plague had not stopped, just because the warships in the sky had decided not to kill each other. But her hands were steadier than they had been in days. And when she looked up through the observation dome at the distant lights in the sky, she thought she could tell which ones were human. She could not, of course. Stars and ships looked the same from this distance. But she thought she could, and that was enough. They expected medical aid, received human warships instead. Part 5. What Human Help Looks Like. The Dravine fleet left the Talon system 41 hours after the warning shot. They did not leave all at once. They pulled back in stages, the smaller ships withdrawing first, then the cruisers, and finally the flagship. Joel Carrick broadcast a short message as he departed. He said that the Dominion had determined that Talon 4 was not of strategic value, and that the Dravine presence had never been intended as a threat. It was a lie, and everyone in the system knew it was a lie, but no one challenged it, because the important thing was not the words. The important thing was that the warships were leaving. Fossick and his Merchants Guild convoy watched the Dravine fleet disappear from their sensors. Fossick sat in the cockpit of his lead cargo hauler and shook his heavy scaled head slowly. He had been trading in this part of space for 40 years, and he had never seen a species face down the Dravine and win without firing a single killing shot. He made a note in his personal log that he needed to learn more about humans. Then he began calculating new trade routes that included the Talon system, because where there was stability, there was commerce, and the humans seemed to bring stability with them. 12 hours after the last Dravine ship left sensor range, the human medical convoy arrived. 3 hospital ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a neat formation. The USNS Garfield, the USNS Whitmore, and the USNS Harlow. They were large white vessels with red markings on their hulls, and they carried no weapons of any kind. Behind them came 6 supply transports, loaded with antiviral medications, portable water filtration systems, emergency food rations, modular field hospitals, and enough medical equipment to treat a population 10 times the size of the Velhari. A single light frigate escorted the convoy, which was entirely unnecessary given that the 9th Battle Group was still in orbit, but regulations required it, and humans were particular about regulations. Dr. Kevin Marsh had been waiting for this moment. He had spent the last 3 days consulting with Seluwun remotely, exchanging data, adapting treatment protocols, and learning everything he could about Velhari biology. He had slept a total of 9 hours in that time. When the hospital ships arrived, he was on the first shuttle to the surface. He landed in the shuttle bay of the Velhari capital, a wide platform carved into a coral ridge above the main underwater city. The air was warm and heavy with salt, and the light was a strange golden color, filtered through the atmosphere of an alien world. Marsh stepped off the shuttle, carrying a medical kit, and a portable data terminal, and he was met by Saloon. She was taller than he had expected. Most Velhari were taller than humans. Her skin was a pale blue-green, and her wide dark eyes had a depth to them that made Marsh feel as though she was seeing more of him than he was comfortable with. She was thin and exhausted, and her skin had the dry, grayish look that he now knew meant severe dehydration and fatigue in her species. She greeted him with the Velhari gesture of trust. She held both hands open, palms up, fingers spread. It meant trust without reservation. It meant I show you that I carry nothing, and I hide nothing. Marsh did not know the formal response, so he simply held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then reached out and placed her palm against his. Her skin was cool and smooth. They did not need many words. They had already spent 3 days talking through screens and data packets. They knew each other's minds, if not each other's faces. They walked together into the medical center and began working. The human antivirals, modified based on the biological data Saloon had provided during the consultation period, were administered to the first wave of patients within 6 hours of the convoy's arrival. The results were not immediate, but they were steady. Within 48 hours, the mortality rate stopped climbing. Within 72 hours, it began to fall. Within a week, new infections dropped by 60%. The modular field hospitals were assembled on the surface platforms by human engineering teams working alongside Velhari volunteers. The human engineers were patient and thorough, and they explained every step of the assembly process so that the Velhari could maintain the equipment after the humans left. Portable filtration systems were deployed to the 3 cities where the water recycling had failed. Emergency rations were distributed to settlements that had been cut off during the quarantine. It was not glamorous work. There were no speeches and no ceremonies. Humans in medical uniforms moved through the underwater corridors of Velhari cities, treating patients, calibrating equipment, training local medical staff. They worked long shifts and ate the same emergency rations they were distributing, and they slept in the same modular shelters they were building. While the medical operation continued on the surface, High Speaker Orenis requested a formal meeting with Captain Ellis. He wanted to understand. He needed to understand. The meeting took place aboard the Ridgeline, in a conference room that Ellis had ordered cleared of any military decoration. The tactical displays had been turned off. The weapons readiness boards had been covered. Ellis wanted the room to feel like neutral ground, not a warship. Ellis arrived in a clean dress uniform with Commander Lisa Pruitt at his side. Orenis arrived with Saloon. They sat across from each other at a simple table, and for a moment, no one spoke. Orenis thanked Ellis for what the humans had done. He said it formally and with great sincerity, and Ellis accepted the thanks with a simple nod. Then Orenis asked the question that had been living inside him since the first human ship appeared in his sky. Why did you come? He explained that the Velhari had nothing to offer humanity. They had no military. They had no strategic position in the galaxy. Their mineral resources, while valuable to the Dravine, were not rare enough to justify a military deployment. They had no political power, no trade networks, no technology that humans did not already possess. They were a small, sick, defenseless species on an unimportant world at the edge of charted space. Why would humans send warships to protect them? Ellis was quiet for a long time. He looked at Orenis, and then at Saloon, and then at his own hands resting on the table. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. He said that humans had a long history. He said that before they reached the stars, they spent thousands of years on a single world, learning how to hurt each other. They had fought wars over land and resources and ideas and religion and pride, and sometimes for no reason at all. They had built weapons capable of destroying their own civilization, and they had come very close to using them, more than once. They carried that history with them everywhere they went, and it had taught them something that most species learned only through suffering. He said that when someone is in pain, and you have the power to help, you help. Not because it benefits you, not because you expect something in return. Not because there is a strategic advantage or a political calculation that makes it worthwhile. You help because the act of helping is the reason. He said that humans had learned this lesson the hard way, through centuries of failing to live up to it, and they were still learning. He said that the warships were not there to conquer, or to claim, or to establish influence. They were there because the Velhari had called for help, and were vulnerable, and humans understood what happens to the vulnerable when there is no one standing between them and the things that would hurt them. So humans brought the medicine and the warships together, because medicine without protection was a gift that could be taken away, and protection without medicine was just another form of control. Together, they were what real help looked like. Orinus was silent for a very long time after Ellis finished speaking. The translator hummed quietly between them. Then, Orinus said that his people had an ancient concept in their oldest language. The closest translation was a shield that heals. He said it was something from their earliest myths, a force that could protect and restore at the same time. He said that before today, it had only been a story told to children. Ellis looked at him and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He said that where he came from, they just called it doing the right thing, and it was not always a myth. The 9th battle group remained in orbit for 3 more weeks while the medical crisis stabilized. During that time, human engineers worked with the Velhari to install a basic orbital sensor network. Not weapons, not shields, just a system of satellites and monitoring stations that would give the Velhari early warning if anyone approached their system with hostile intent. They would never again be caught unaware. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer personally oversaw the installation. He trained a small team of Velhari technicians to operate and maintain the system. On the last day before the battle group departed, he sat with the Velhari team in their new monitoring station and ran through the procedures one final time. When he was satisfied they understood everything, he stood up and shook each of their hands and told them to take care of themselves. When the battle group finally departed, the ships left orbit one by one. Selûne stood in the observation tower of the capital and watched them climb into the sky. The heavy cruiser Ridgeline was the last to leave. She watched its lights grow smaller and fainter until they merged with the stars, and she could not tell which point of light was a ship and which was a sun burning 1,000 light-years away. She recorded a message for the Velhari Planetary Archives. It was a simple account of what had happened. The plague, the Dravine, the humans. She described the events clearly and without exaggeration, and when she reached the end, she paused for a long moment before adding a final thought. She said that the humans came with warships, and somehow it was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her people. The Velhari medical distress beacon was deactivated. In its place, a new signal began broadcasting on a narrow encrypted frequency. It was a direct communication link to the nearest human outpost. It was not a cry for help. It was a handshake, a connection, a quiet promise that the conversation was not over. Across the cluster, other species took notice of what had happened at Talon 4. The Dravine Dominion quietly removed the planet from its list of expansion targets. The Merchants Guild rerouted trade lanes to include the Talon system, and in the intelligence offices of a dozen alien governments, analysts updated their files on humanity with a new note that said simply to never mistake their compassion for weakness. In the deep quiet of space, the USS Callaway continued its patrol. Captain Daniel Greer sat in his chair on the bridge, reading the next sector assignment. Hannah Cole looked up from her console and told him they were picking up another distress signal, this one from a mining colony in the Kethera Belt. She asked if they should flag it. Greer did not hesitate. He told her to flag it and routed to Central Command and set a course. He said that if someone was asking for help, then humans answer. The Callaway adjusted its heading and accelerated into the dark. Behind it, in orbit around a healing world, the last traces of the battle group's engine signatures faded and disappeared. And on the ocean floor of Talon 4, in a medical hall that was no longer overwhelmed, a Velhari biologist named Selwyn sat at her workstation and opened a new research file. She titled it simply, Human Studies. She had a feeling there was a great deal left to learn. They expected medical aid, received human warships instead. Part 1. The Distress Call. The first decks were quiet. They happened in the deep water cities of Talon 4, in the nurseries and the elder homes, where the weakest of the Velhari lived. The plague moved through the water like a whisper. It entered through the gills, and settled in the blood, and it killed without noise or warning. By the time the doctors understood what was happening, entire districts had gone silent. The Velhari were an amphibian species. They were tall and thin, with smooth blue-green skin and wide dark eyes that saw well in the dim light of their ocean floors. They had lived on Talon 4 for thousands of years, building their civilization in the spaces between coral towers and volcanic ridges. They were scientists and healers. They studied the currents and the stars and the tiny organisms that lived in the thermal vents. They had never built a weapon. In all their long history, no one had ever come to hurt them. High Speaker Orenus stood in the council chamber of the capital city. The chamber was a vast dome of living coral, open at the top so that the filtered light of the twin suns could reach the floor. Around him sat the 12 members of the ruling council, each one representing a different region of the ocean world. Their faces were drawn and tired and afraid. The numbers were terrible. 8% of the population had died in less than 3 weeks. The medical facilities were full, beyond their limits. The medicines they had were not working against this new pathogen. Their best biologists were studying it around the clock, but they were running out of time. Orenus made the decision that no High Speaker had ever made before. He ordered the communications tower to broadcast a distress beacon on all open channels, reaching out into the wider galaxy and asking anyone who could hear them to please send medical aid, antibiotics, antiviral compounds, doctors, anything. Selun, the youngest member of the council and the head of the planetary biology division, supported the decision but warned Orenus that broadcasting on open channels was dangerous. It told every species within range that Talon 4 was in trouble. It told them the Velhari were weak. Orenus listened to her warning and understood it, and sent the signal anyway, because his people were dying, and pride was a luxury he could not afford. The signal went out into the dark, and it traveled far. It reached a Merchants Guild relay station, where a reptilian trader named Fossick heard it, and began loading his cargo ships with whatever generic medicines he could find. It reached the listening posts of the Korath Confederacy, who noted it in their records and did nothing. It reached the outer territories of the Sinari Republic, who debated the matter in committee and scheduled a vote for the following month. And it reached the command bridge of a Dravine warship. The Dravine Dominion was an empire built on conquest. They were a large insectoid species with hard exoskeletons and compound eyes and a social structure that valued strength above all other things. They had been expanding their territory for centuries, swallowing smaller species, and stripping their worlds of resources. They had been watching Talon 4 for a long time. The ocean floor was rich with rare minerals that the Dravine needed for their shipbuilding programs. But the Velhari had always been a protected species under interstellar convention, too peaceful and too sympathetic for the Dravine to attack without drawing unwanted attention. But now the Velhari were dying. Their defenses, which had never been strong, were non-existent, and they had just told the entire galaxy exactly how vulnerable they were. Fleet Commander Shal Karik read the distress signal in his command chamber and saw opportunity. He was a veteran of dozens of campaigns, a tall and angular figure with mandibles that clicked when he was thinking. He contacted the Dominion High Council and proposed a simple plan. He would take 40 warships to Talon 4 under the pretense of delivering humanitarian aid. Once in orbit, he would offer the Velhari a protection agreement with terms so demanding that it would amount to full surrender, a permanent military base, exclusive mining rights, control of orbital space. The Velhari would have no choice but to accept, because the alternative was to refuse and face the fleet with nothing. The High Council approved the plan within hours. Karik assembled his fleet and set course for the Talon system. The signal also reached a much smaller ship, far from the major trade routes, operating in the quiet space near the border of uncharted territory. The USS Callaway was a human deep space patrol frigate. It was not large or particularly impressive. It carried a crew of 112 and enough firepower to handle pirates and border disputes, but not much more. Its captain was a man named Daniel Greer. Greer was 43 years old, with short gray hair and a calm, steady voice that rarely rose above a conversational tone. He had served in the fleet for 20 years and had earned a reputation as a man who followed procedure, respected the chain of command, and never made decisions based on emotion. When the distress signal came through, he was sitting in his chair on the bridge, reading a maintenance report. His communications officer, Lieutenant Hannah Cole, flagged the signal and put it on the main display. She was younger than Greer by 15 years, sharp-eyed and quick-thinking. With red hair she kept tied back in a tight knot. She told Greer that the signal was a medical distress beacon from a species called the Velhari, and that they were asking for pharmaceutical aid and medical personnel. She also noted that the signal was unencrypted and broadcasting on every open frequency, which meant that anyone could hear it. Greer studied the signal for a moment, and then told Cole to forward it to Central Command with a priority flag. The response from Central Command came faster than either of them expected. Admiral Patricia Dunn, a woman in her late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, and eyes that missed nothing, read the briefing in her office at Fleet Headquarters. She pulled up the regional intelligence reports and saw the Dravine fleet movements. She saw the trajectory and the timing, and she understood immediately what was about to happen. She did not send a medical convoy. She sent the 9th Expeditionary Battle Group. 12 warships, including the heavy cruiser USS Ridgeline, under the command of Captain Nathan Ellis. She attached a secondary order for the medical convoy to follow, but the warships would arrive first. When Greer received the updated orders, he read them twice. He looked at Cole and told her that he had expected hospital ships, not a battle group. Cole pulled up the long-range sensors and ran a deep scan of the Talon system approach vectors. She found the Dravine fleet. 40 warships on a direct course for Talon 4. She turned to Greer and said quietly that the Velhari had asked for doctors, and that she wondered how they would feel when human warships showed up in their sky instead. Greer leaned back in his chair and looked at the display for a long time. Then he said that they would probably be terrified. But being terrified and being alive were not the same thing. And if the Dravine got there first, the Velhari would not get to be either. He ordered the Callaway to set course for Talon 4 at maximum speed and to run silent once they entered the system. They would arrive before the battle group and before the Dravine, and they would watch and wait and be ready. The Callaway turned toward the distant light of the Talon star and accelerated into the dark. Behind them, 12 warships were already moving. Ahead of them, 40 more were doing the same. And on the ocean floor of a dying world, the Velhari waited for medicine that they did not yet know would come with guns.